This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today is November 20th, 2021, and I'm producer Pat. We have three interesting segments for you today. Darren asks the question, where does Clark Kent change into Superman? Adam looks into whether house prices are really increasing as much as we think. But first, Cristina takes on a listener request for a segment about Dr. Mae Jemison. Hope everyone out there is staying safe and healthy, and we will talk to you soon.
A couple of weeks ago, a listener named Andrew sent us an email. Some context, this was shortly after William Shatner, Star Trek's Captain Kirk, made headlines going to space aboard Blue Origin's New Shepard launch vehicle. Here's Andrew's note. Could you do a segment on Mae Jemison, who was the first Black woman in space, and also the first astronaut to appear on Star Trek nearly 30 years before Mr. Shatner? My reply was, that's a great idea, and what? I had no idea about the Star Trek appearance. To which Andrew replied, I know, right? Also, of course, it might be worth mentioning James Doohan's last resting place. Maybe I'm reading into it a little too much, Pat, but I'm starting to suspect that Andrew is a Star Trek fan.
Yeah. I had never heard of her before he wrote in.
I had, but I had no idea she was on Star Trek. Mae Jemison is extraordinary. I'm citing info from a few different resources, which you'll find, as always, linked in our show notes at trcpodcast.com.
That's a great website.
It is. Now, as summarized on her wiki page and biography.com, Mae Carol Jemison, born October 17th, 1956, is an American physician and astronaut. In 1987, she became the first African-American woman to be admitted into NASA's astronaut training program. 5 years later, in 1992, she became the first African-American woman to travel to space aboard the Shuttle Endeavour, where she served as the science mission specialist on the STS-47 Space Lab J flight. Jemison was born in Alabama, raised in Chicago, and as a kid, she was known to spend a lot of time in her school library learning about science in general, and she was especially interested in astronomy. Now, she thankfully had supportive parents who recognized her interests and her abilities, and they encouraged her to pursue them. In high school, she decided to study biomedical engineering and got into Stanford University on a National Achievement Scholarship.
Wow.
After graduating with degrees, I said degrees, not just one, in chemical engineering and African American studies, she headed to Cornell University Medical College. During her time at med school, she somehow found time to study in Cuba, Kenya, and worked in Thailand at a Cambodian refugee camp. And after earning her medical degree in 1981, she became a general practitioner and was a Peace Corps medical officer for Sierra Leone and Liberia. Now, this woman's life and achievements are truly inspiring, and we haven't even really gotten to the astronaut part yet. Okay, so how did we get from GP to NASA? Well, as a kid, Jemison remembers being frustrated by the lack of female astronauts during the Apollo missions, which ran from 61 to 72. She recalled, quote, everybody was thrilled about space, but I remember being really, really irritated that there were no women astronauts. Now, after leaving the Peace Corps, she settled in Los Angeles, and inspired by the flights of Sally Ride and Guillaume Bluford in 1983, Jemison decided to apply to NASA's astronaut program. Now get this, Pat. She first applied to the training program in 1985, but because of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986, NASA postponed the selection of new candidates. I mean, obviously, it makes sense. So she reapplied in 1987, and she was chosen one of the 15 out of approximately 2,000 candidates, making history. Now, Jemison spent 8 days in space, conducting weightlessness and motion sickness experiments on the crew, including herself, noting after her experience, this is a quote via biography site, that society should recognize how much both women and members of other minority groups can contribute if given the opportunity. Hear, hear. She left NASA in 1993 to accept a teaching fellowship at Dartmouth College, where she became a professor of environmental studies. She founded the Jemison Group, a company which explores and develops standalone science and technology companies. Currently, she is leading the 100-year Starship project through the United States Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA for short. The objective of the nonprofit initiative is to assure human space travel to another star is possible within the next 100 years. No big whoop. Now, in seriousness, it's actually pretty mind-blowing to try and wrap my head around the type of research and technology needed to make interstellar travel possible. Maybe something we could talk to Dr. Astro Stu about at some point. In 1993, Jemison was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame and has garnered several notable awards, too many to mention, and honorary doctorates. Now here's where the fun Star Trek fact comes in. Jemison was a Star Trek fan and inspired to one-day travel in space thanks to Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura on the OG Star Trek TV show. In fact, she began each shift in space by informing Houston's mission control that hailing frequencies were open.
Nice.
So in 1993, she no doubt fulfilled a Trekkie childhood dream with an appearance in Star Trek The Next Generation's sixth-season episode, Second Chances, playing Lieutenant Junior Grade Palmer. This is when I miss having Adam. I'm sure he'd have a lot of input, like, yeah, that was the episode where this and this happened.
For sure.
But I did watch TNG, admittedly. I did watch that whole series, so. Add to her other firsts the distinction of being the first real-life astronaut to appear on Star Trek. By the way, LeVar Burton, who played Geordi on The Next Generation, serves on the 100-year Starship Projects Advisory Committee, which is cool. Since Jemison's career is well documented, I wanted to try and find, a couple of fun facts about this astounding human. And I found an article on the U.S. Energy Department site, energy.gov, originally published as part of their 2016 Women's History Month celebration. Mae Jemison is a trained dancer. She actually brought a poster from her dance school with her to space. How cool. She even considered becoming a professional dancer versus going to med school. And apparently her mom gave her some advice when she was debating her path. And she said, you can always dance if you're a doctor, but you can't doctor if you're a dancer. Such mom advice. Now, I didn't catch this until I saw this particular article, but when she started at Stanford studying chemical engineering, she was only 16 years old.
Wow.
She's also ironically afraid of heights and claims she relied on the strength of her ego to push through it. That's pretty badass. Now, I mentioned earlier that her parents were super supportive, but unfortunately, she had to deal with other roadblocks, specifically and sadly from teachers who didn't exactly encourage young women to pursue STEM-related fields. One incident happened after Jemison stated she wanted to be a scientist, and a teacher asked her, did you mean a nurse? So this only fueled Jemison, and she later founded an international science camp called The Earth We Share, aka TEWS. I'm not sure how they pronounce it, TEWS, and it encourages science literacy, in short. So thank you, Andrew, for writing in and suggesting this as a segment. It was really cool to learn about Mae Jemison and her life and all of her accomplishments. But before I wrap up, I promised to get to what Andrew is referring to with his comment about actor James Doohan's last resting place, because I had not heard about this and it's pretty frickin' cool. So I did a quick search and easily found a few articles, but USA Today had an article from December 2020 titled Ashes of James Doohan, Scotty from Star Trek, Hidden on International Space Station. Really? Had you ever heard of this, Pat?
I had heard of this, yes.
Now, James Doohan, who passed away in 2005 at 85, famously portrayed Chief Engineer Scotty on the original Star Trek TV series. Now, even if you don't follow the show, you may be familiar with his beloved character thanks to pop culture references and Captain, she's about to blow memes. Side note, according to Mental Floss, Scotty never actually said this iconic phrase in the original series or films. Hit it, Darren.
I'm giving her all she's got, Captain.
Honestly, Pat, I would have bet money that he said that in those episodes. It just became such an ubiquitous quote. It was kind of like a Berenstain Bear moment for me. So here's an excerpt from that article. I have been keeping a secret for over 12 years. Chris Doohan, one of the sons of the Star Trek actor, wrote on Twitter, adding a link to a December 25th article from the Times of London that revealed the secret. The Starship Enterprise engineer has traveled nearly 1.7 billion miles through space, orbiting Earth more than 70,000 times after his ashes were hidden secretly on the ISS. My dad had 3 passions: space, science, and trains. He always wanted to go into space, Chris Doohan told the Times. Now, Richard Garriott, an entrepreneur and one of the first private citizens in space, says he smuggled James Doohan's ashes on the ISS in 2008 during a 12-day mission as a private astronaut in a plot concocted by Chris Doohan. The caper entailed printing 3 cards with a Doohan photograph and laminating each with a sprinkling of ashes sealed inside and hidden inside his flight data file. So this is wild. Garrett floated 1 card into space. A second he hid under the cladding on the floor of the space station's Columbus module in 2008. And the third is framed on a wall in Doohan's son's home. Now, the article says NASA declined to comment on the story since Garriott was a spaceflight participant with the Russian space agency Roscosmos. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but there you go. They did issue a statement in USA Today addressing the interest in the story. Quote, NASA has a long cultural connection with Star Trek and can appreciate the interest fans around the world have in this story. And with that, checkers, live long and stay classy, not smartassy.
What's up, cuboids?
I guess I'm a singular cuboid, but the listeners are the plural.
We're all cuboids.
Yeah, we are.
In 2021, it really seems like real estate prices keep going up and up. Now, to be fair, there has been a particularly pronounced jump recently, but these prices might not be going up as much as people expect, and I'll look at a few factors that can be changing their perception. So inflation's the obvious one. It's a little surprising how little people sometimes consider inflation, or maybe they consider it, but they don't truly appreciate the scope of how much inflation has occurred.
Do you mean in the early stages of the universe when there was a rapid period of inflation?
Yeah, that's why real estate was probably pretty cheap back when the universe was a single point.
Well, I just want to say maybe it was a bubble. So,
So people will say, oh, my boomer parents X years ago bought their family home for Y dollars. It's like, that's so long ago. Are you considering what they made or what their household income was or anything like that? The price of everything goes up, and it does not go up equally, which causes some differences. The purchasing power of one's dollar generally increases over time for most goods.
I was going to say, you said the price of everything goes up, which, to be pedantic, is not quite true, but...
Okay, yeah, there may be things that say somewhat stable.
Well, electronics also come down. So if you think of trying to buy certain things, the performance you get, it's much cheaper than it used to be.
You're right. So the purchasing power of your dollar doesn't always go up, but sometimes it does. But the purchasing power of what a person can buy with an average sort of hours work or days work or whatever generally goes up for a lot of goods. So an hour of work, for example, will buy a lot more food today than it did 50, 100, or 1,000 years ago. Just the percentage of someone's income that has to go towards food has gone down considerably. Some goods and services reduce in price a lot over time, right? Computers, TVs. I'm amazed at the kind of things I can buy at the dollar store. I think when I was a kid, this might have cost $10. It's like $1 now. And inflation does not account for that, right? Of course, the purchasing power of your dollar when it comes to real estate hasn't really changed over time, or hasn't really gotten better over time. So while house prices go up with inflation, there are a lot of reasons for which you wouldn't necessarily see this. So I found an article on supermoney.com which breaks down house prices in the US by a lot of factors. So I'm using US numbers because a lot of our listeners are in the US. Canada probably has similar trends with different sort of peaks. The article is about a year old. So since then, house prices have also jumped up considerably in many markets, but the idea is generally the same. If you look at house prices over time, it just goes up and up and up, and this is the kind of thing people usually talk about. But a graph of the stock market kind of looks the same, even if it isn't quite as pronounced. Instead of looking at that kind of graph, looking at a graph of house prices fixed to inflation works better. The graph in the article, linked in the show notes at trcpodcast.com,
Great website.
shows median house prices. So the author of the article argues that average prices can be deceptive since the very high and low ones can skew it, but a median works well. So same when you talk about incomes, like averages are deceptive, but medians will work better. So if you look at these numbers, the prices in the US are pretty stable from 1970 till about the mid-90s, and then they go up and peak around sort of 2006, 2007, and then they go back down, they bottom out around 2012, and then they go back up, and they're on their way back up. So they're currently close to 2006 prices, which leads some to speculate that a crash in prices might be occurring soon. But I've heard people predicting dropping house prices all of my adult life, and it's not something I've really seen where I live. So absolutely, even accounting for inflation, prices are still high right now, but they just aren't as high up as some people seem to be considering. So what are other factors that we can consider? So another metric that one can use is the Case-Shiller Index. So this looks at data on repeat sales of single-family homes. So when a new house is built in a new area, they're sold. That might not be as comparable to older houses. So this index makes sure you're comparing actual similar houses. You're comparing apples to apples and not like a crab apple to like some really big juicy apple. A terrible red delicious to a delicious Macintosh.
A crab apple to a crabapple, which is completely different.
Exactly. So by this metric, we aren't actually as high as we were in 2007, but we're getting there. And we can instead compare house prices to median income. So in this case, house prices outpace median income in the US. So incomes rise over time, but home prices are rising a bit more, making it harder for first-time home buyers to enter the market, but not impossible because that gap isn't as big as maybe some people think it is just by looking at those house prices. Okay. But to get to the whole reason I wanted to do this segment, we aren't comparing the same thing. Houses in the 70s and 80s aren't the same as houses today, so we aren't comparing the same house. New homes are bigger. New homes are 40% larger than they were 40 years ago.
What? Now, is that because people are 40% larger?
Maybe partially. I think about things like that, right? Like I'm taller. If I was in a house that was built 100 years ago, like I hit my head on everything, right? So in 2018, that's not surface area. That would be more volume, right? With higher ceilings. That's a different thing. I think ceilings are probably higher too, but I don't have that data. In 2018, the median sized new home was 781 square feet larger than in 1978. So that's a lot of square feet in difference there. So let's instead look at the price per square foot of a new single home adjusted to inflation, of course. So there's a graph, you can't see it here, but you can see it in the show notes. So this graph starts in 1978 at $129.91 per square foot. And in 2020, quarter two, it's $146 per square foot. That's not a huge difference. It's like 10%. It's not like double. It's not like 50% more.
10 to 15, yeah.
Yeah. So it's been going up a bit lately, but the rise isn't astronomical. In 2017, the price per square foot was only 4% higher than in 1978. That's really not much. So in 1978, only 8% of homes had 3 or more bathrooms. Today, 40% do. My current home has 2. My last house had 4. A lot of bathrooms.
Well, to be fair, a lot of things are a bathroom if you're creative. It's like a Mitch Hedberg lie. Look, just because there's a sink in it doesn't mean it's not a bedroom.
Yep. Only 63% of homes were air conditioned in 1978, while 94% are now. I was a bit surprised by this stat. I didn't have AC growing up. I always considered it a bit of a luxury, but it's nice to have.
We didn't at one point, but then we did. But then we didn't always use it because it was still a concern.
Yeah. Now, it's important to note that there are some regional differences which are more pronounced in the northeastern and western U.S., so they have higher increases in price per square foot. So often people will complain about housing prices and it relates to the specific city where they live. In Canada, I'll hear people complain about housing prices in Toronto and Vancouver mostly. Like people say the prices are going out of control in Ottawa, but they're nothing compared to Toronto and Vancouver.
Yeah. Or when there's housing price issues in other places, it's usually because they also blame the people from Toronto or Vancouver going somewhere else, which is not invalid in a way. But yeah, very few people are like, well, Sudbury, the prices are just going way, way up. Mm-hmm. I don't hear this. Maybe it's true, but I just don't hear it.
Maybe. So I live in Chelsea, which is in Quebec, where house prices are lower than on the Ontario side. And this is offset by a difference in provincial income tax. So if I had lower taxes, because I lived in Ottawa, I would probably be able to afford maybe 50-60% increase in my mortgage payments. So much to say, there may be a housing bubble in New York, and there may be a housing bubble in California, but this isn't necessarily reflected in the Midwest or the South in the U.S. with remote work allowing some people to have more flexibility of where they live, it might make sense for people to move to a more affordable city, which then in turn will raise the prices in that city. So there's a bit of a factor going on there. So basically, if you live in the southern U.S., the cost of a similar sized house adjusted for inflation hasn't really gone up in 40 years.
Well, I almost wondered if it's gone down based on what you said.
Oh, probably in some places it has.
Well, I guess that's the median. If you took the average, you could see that somehow being masked, where if houses are bigger and it's mainly loosely tied to inflation and people think, oh, it's a lot more expensive, it could actually compensate, where some places they're getting more square footage. And
yeah, but with incomes going up too, I feel like there's other factors that might compensate there.
Totally.
So there are a few other factors not mentioned in this article that which I was thinking of when I was thinking about this segment, which I've been thinking of doing for months. And these relate to family size and divorce. I think this could be a factor. So growing up, my parents had 4 kids. This wasn't typical at the time, but it was more typical than it is now, right? Family sizes have been gradually shrinking over time. Like nothing considerable. They're not half the size of what they were, but they're shrinking. So I shared a room with one of my brothers pretty much until I was an adult and I moved into my own apartment. I don't know a lot of kids these days that share a room. I think it surely happens, but I think it's less common. So the size of a house is a factor here. Everyone gets their own room along with their own things. A lot more people have, a lot of parents have an ensuite bathroom that they don't share with the kids and things like that. Nice luxuries that people probably didn't commonly have in the 1980s, for example.
That's an interesting point I hadn't considered. So houses are getting bigger and families are getting smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're buying a bigger house for less people. Now you got, maybe you got an office or whatever. You got a room for your car, which maybe people didn't have as much back in the day. Right?
Yeah, and some TVs are bigger than kids. So
60 inches, pretty big. Now this isn't just a perception. I found a graph of average family size in the U.S. over time. In 1960, the number was 3.67, and today it's 3.15. So it's not half, but there's a big difference there. It's actually been pretty consistent for about 20 years, but going back further, we see that family sizes were bigger for those of us who are sort of my age, maybe not for some of our younger listeners. They'd be like, yeah, whatever. That's what my family size was. So consider this to include not just the number of children, but also the later ages at which people cohabitate and that a lot of people decide not to have children. So if someone considers the cost of homeownership to be prohibitive as a single person, perhaps 40 years ago, that same person, that same age, would have owned half a home, had a bunch of children sharing it, right? So divorce and shared custody strike me as a potential factor, which has evolved over time. Again, like with specific families, this may differ, and some people's experiences may have been different. But rates of divorce change over time. But the bigger change is in custody. So while even as late as the 1990s, child custody usually fell to one sole parent, usually the mother, these days shared custody is much more common. So what this means is that today we have a lot more children who, depending on how you look at it, are either occupying 2 rooms or leaving a room empty half the time. So where's all the space in all these houses going? People like to blame, you have more stuff or you have more clutter, but consider that 30 or 40 years ago, a couple of kids might have shared a room, and today 2 kids could easily have 4 rooms, 2 in 2 different houses. So finally, I see a lot of people that get really mad at the housing market, and I kind of ask, who are you getting mad at? What's going on here? So they're really getting mad at other people who also want houses like them. This isn't Pokemon card collecting, where it's just sort of the speculation and people are artificially raising the price for their own reasons. So a lot of this is just other people who also want to buy a house in the same neighborhood that you want to buy a house in. So there's another factor, foreign investors, people buying up real estate and things like that. And that surely is a factor, but I think largely prices are dictated by people who want to buy it, families who are looking to live in that particular neighborhood. And they themselves are also annoyed that the prices are high. No one's happy that they have to pay more for a house. Everyone would be happy to pay less in a nice neighborhood.
Except once they have a house, and then they're very happy that the price keeps going up.
Yeah, so there's a flip there. People would be happy for the price of their own house to increase, but the owner of a house is not the one who decides how expensive their house is. Their house, obviously they set a certain price when they sell it, but that what they can sell their house for, what it will actually sell for, is dictated by what someone is willing to pay for it.
Correct.
It's
the market.
Basic market forces.
Which is why, and I think some people realize this, some people don't, many political parties or organizations that are trying to make it easier for people to buy homes in perhaps, say, a market of limited supply, don't help things at all. You think you might be helping some individuals buy a home, and perhaps you are, but overall, you've just made it easier for people to buy homes, which increases demand. And if you haven't changed the supply, you've either made the problem similar or worse than it already was.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of factors there. So you want to encourage new homes to be built, but then people are also resistant to urban sprawl. They're often resistant to densification, which is densification is good, especially if you want to support people living closer to the core. But if people are interested in buying a larger house, it won't matter if you put up condos and things like that. They're going to want to buy a big house in the suburbs or something. And COVID and pandemics and remote work changes a lot of these factors. So there's a lot going on. But if you're angry about it, maybe you're angry with yourself.
Everyone loves that as a response.
So house prices are high in some markets, not as much in others. And if you're finding it unrealistic to buy a house in the area in which you live, maybe you want to live somewhere else. There are a lot of factors which contribute to higher house prices, but when we consider inflation and property size, a lot of these effects are reduced considerably, which means part of this is illusory, and another is simply changing preferences dictated by market forces driven by consumers who have different interests over time. That's okay. If you don't like it, you can rent an apartment with a smaller footprint. You can live in a trailer. You can move somewhere cheaper. There's always options. May not be options you like.
Great segment, Adam. Many people might not be happy to hear this whatsoever, either homeowner or not, or people who just see this as a very much of a social justice issue. I think it's very important. I think you and I talked about something like this a while ago, so I'm happy you're covering it. I saw someone like, wait, square footage. It's sort of a reminder that there are often variables that one does not think about when they read a headline or comparisons are being made. And this is a great example that even if it was dismissible, I should have at least asked, like, well, are the houses the same? Like, just the basic, are you comparing the same things? It's a very straightforward question. You should always ask yourself, like, this has changed over time. There's a problem here. You're like, well, what's being compared? Is it the same thing? What are the other reasons it might have changed? And inflation, of course, is a thing, but people just don't usually think about the nature of the good that has changed. And I sort of said it before, electronics have come down. It might actually be more expensive now to buy an old cathode ray TV if you don't find it in a dumpster.
Yes.
Just because
Depends.
Well, they're not making them now.
Yes.
A new one, yes. A new one might actually be quite expensive because I'm not sure who would make them. But it just shows that it's not the same good at all. So an old boxy 35-inch TV to a newer, sleeker 65-inch TV, and the boxy one used to be more expensive. These aren't the same thing. I mean, they're a TV in the broadest sense of the word. But and so similarly with homes, maybe things get a bit more expensive, but then people are in theory getting better homes.
Yes.
Or sorry, getting bigger homes. I'm not quite sure if they're better, but they're bigger.
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors. And I guess a lot of it always comes down to people like to focus on, like, here's a crappy house in an old neighborhood that's like $1 million house and it looks like a shack. And it's like, yes, this neighborhood in downtown Vancouver or downtown Toronto or whatever is going to have a huge thing. And it's probably someone's going to buy the house, tear it down, rebuild a new one, and the property is worth that much that's worth it. These are kind of outliers to the general problem of, like, how much does a new home cost? Like, at the end of the day, it's not practical for everyone, depending where they live, depending where they work. But, like, 3 years ago, I built a house. I bought a lot. The lot wasn't that expensive. Build a house. It was expensive to build a house, but the value that was in that house after it was built was there, right? If you don't like what this, like, artificially speculated market is, well, okay, like, this is how much it costs to build a house. Like, this is how much the labor is. This is how much the materials are. And that's gone up with the pandemic, which is reflected in the house costs. So you got to think about it. It's not just this ethereal thing. Like, a house has value. It's worth something. The land has value. The building has value based on what goes into it and what that product is. So
you're saying some goods follow economic principles? I don't think if we're ready for this, Adam. This is a revelation. By the way, for those interested in this quirky notion of perhaps paying for space or tearing down a house and how that has value, the world of Japan real estate is a bit different than here.
Oh, yeah.
Where they tear things down very frequently and rebuild in a way that we don't. Even things that are relatively recent, I think it has to do with just, like, renewal, or it's just something you do. And for us, it just seems like that's a colossal waste of resources. But different cultures utilize resources in different ways, and what looks like a waste to one is not waste to the other.
Yeah, and there's other factors like heritage buildings, older buildings, right? Anything, here in Canada, anything over 100 years old is, oh my God, this is the oldest thing in the world. You go to Europe and you're like, what? Is it 400 years old?
Well, just another Japanese story. When I was there, like, this is a really old building. It's been here since the year 700. And it's that, right? And you look at the plaque and it's like, and it burnt down 3 times. Yeah. You're like, wait a minute. So this building hasn't been there that long, but it's like the idea of that building has been there that long.
Sure. Well, it's like I can't remember the name of the ship, but yes, you take a piece off and you put a new piece on.
Theseus.
Theseus' ship.
Thank you, Adam. And until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
I thought it was time to take a break from my lighter topics and cover something hard-hitting for once. Where does Clark get changed into Superman? Now I can hear you saying, a phone booth, of course. Darren, if that is your real name. Or at least he did before we had smartphones, right? And if so, where did this idea come from? Well, Pat made me aware of an article exploring this very topic by Steve Eunice at supermanhomepage.com, which you may be surprised to learn has many interesting facts about Superman and related topics. Yes. So Eunice has definitely done his homework, and he argues that, quote, right throughout every era of Superman comics, the phone booth change has rarely been seen. It's a provocative beginning. And then goes on to further expand on this claim with a detailed review of various Superman media. Hold on to your geekiness for this reverse chronological exploration. There was a phone booth change in the recent Superman and Lois TV show, like last year, where Supes is actually wearing the costume from the 1940s. That's cute. In Smallville, an earlier show, there seems to have been no phone booth changes, with the only thing close is in Season 3, episode Exile for you nerds, where Clark calls Kansas from a phone booth in Metropolis. Doesn't really count.
But, well, I gave up on Smallville about Season 4, but, like, he wasn't even Superman for most of that show.
I'm just sharing, right? For all 10 seasons.
Sure.
Doesn't happen. There was no phone booth in any of the Justice League cartoons, although Eunice mentions that Clark goes for a phone booth in a Batman Brave and Bold episode.
Interesting.
No phone booth was used in the entire Superman the Animated Series, which ran from 1996 to 2000.
Yeah.
What about that 90s TV show, Lois and Clark?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Eunice says that to his knowledge, there are only 3 phone booth changes over the series' 4 years, 1993 to 1997. One each in Season 2, 3, and 4, mostly doing the quick spin into Superman.
That's a lot.
Yeah, well, given how often he turned into Superman, though.
Yes.
3 times over that many. Now, again, these are not Netflix seasons of only 10 episodes.
Sure.
Right?
Yes, they're full seasons, I remember.
Yeah. So I think proportionally, it's not.
Yes. Okay.
Additionally, good old Clark used a phone booth in a few episodes of the live-action Superboy TV series from the late 80s. I never actually saw this one. And the phone booth was also used in at least 2 of the Ruby Spears Superman cartoons. Okay. I've also never seen those. Okay, but what about the very impactful Superman movies?
Absolutely.
There was one in Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, but none in the second and third movies. And what about 1978's Superman, the movie, as it's titled? As Eunice says, quote, the phone booth and Superman are so connected within the minds of the general public that in 1978, when Superman the movie was released to cinemas, people roared with laughter when Clark Kent, seeing Lois dangling from the crashed helicopter atop the Daily Planet building, looks for somewhere to change into Superman, walks up to an open design phone booth, looks it up and down, and realizes it won't do.
So he does not use the phone booth.
No, it was funny. He then uses a revolving door to quickly turn to Superman, flies up.
This.
That's a bad outfit. I remember that guy saying. Anyway, I remember watching that and thinking it was amusing.
Yes.
Or I remember thinking I should have thought that. Because did I get the joke as a child? I'm not sure. First time I saw it, probably didn't. As an adult or an older kid, I probably then thought it was funny. So, given all that, the phone booth is rarely used in all sorts of Superman media since the late 70s, but it was already established by then. So where did it come from? Well, it wasn't in the 1950s George Reeves' Adventures of Superman TV series. And here's a quote, Clark mostly used the Daily Planet storeroom to make his costume change. Sometimes he used a back alleyway, but in all 104 episodes, he never used a phone booth. Okay, well, what about the radio show in the 1940s? Well, it was sometimes mentioned that he would use a phone booth. Of course, again, the hearing of it versus the visual isn't going to make it stick in someone's mind as much. What about something earlier? Well, how about going to the source? Superman's creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, did use a phone booth in a newspaper comic strip in late 1942. Quoting Eunice, Clark, seeing that there's a job for Superman, excuses himself from Lois by arranging to be called away by a bogus phone call. While inside the phone booth, he says to himself, this definitely isn't the most comfortable place in the world to switch garments, but I've got to change identities, and in a hurry. Sounds like people talked in the 1940s. I wonder if people actually talked that way, or did we just think they did?
We have recordings.
Yeah, we do. Listen here, see? Yet this was not the very first time Superman found himself changing clothes inside a phone booth. So what is the origin? And why is that gag in the Superman the movie work, right? So Eunice says, quote, "It's not from the comic strips or newspaper strips. It's not from various TV shows, not from the cartoons or shows on television. None of these. The answer lies way back in 1941. Continuing with the quote, "To my knowledge, Clark Kent first changed to Superman inside a phone booth in The Mechanical Monsters, the second of 17 Superman cartoons produced by Fleischer Studios for Paramount Pictures. It was released to cinemas on November 28th, 1941. So there you have it. 80 years ago, in a Superman cinema cartoon, that began the connection between Clark Kent, Superman, and the phone booth.
So I found this article very surprising. Let's say I found the segment surprising. Pretend I didn't read the article like 2 weeks ago.
Article available on trcpodcast.com.
I was really surprised. I thought it was very iconic. Superman changes in the phone booth. I'm totally on board. I'm wondering if maybe that one clip from the movie theater thing is something that was seen on TV frequently. Because obviously I wasn't in the movie theater in 1941. Or I'm wondering if just maybe I remember Quest for Peace more. I mean, that's a movie I've seen a lot, even though it's not a good movie by Superman movie standards.
By movie standards.
Yeah. And Lois and Clark, yes, I watched Lois and Clark. Yes, I probably would have watched all three of those transformations, but I feel like I already had that idea before that show was out. I don't think it's that. Yep. So the whole thing kind of, it's like it's got a Mandela effect type of thing. Like, it's just like, what's going on here? And very surprising.
I agree with you. I would have thought it's more prevalent. Especially perhaps even in the comics, but no. I mean, this guy didn't read every single comic again to see, but he did collect a variety of imagery, and sometimes it appears on the cover of a comic, most of the time it doesn't. And so why would this be? And it could be that once it happened, there was so little other media with Superman. Like, it could be that what you saw in the Fleischer cartoon, how often did he change and how many other ways did he change? But I don't know why this particularly took hold. I mean, if anyone has any insight, they can feel free to write in. You could say, like, well, where else could he change? And in the movies, he's changed kind of in midair. I don't know where his other clothes went. That makes no sense. Same thing with that revolving door. Again, where did the clothes go? In the phone booth, where did the clothes go? But the phone booth might be one of the few publicly available changing stations, for lack of a better phrase.
Yes.
That is visible enough to, like, the audience would want to see it. Clearly, he could pop into a building, change, and pop out of the building. Sure. Like, I guess with the George Reeve things, some storeroom or something. But yeah, I thought it was far more common as well. But it seems like, at least across Superman media, it's fractional. Like, there's a very small percentage of the time he's actually using a phone booth.
And I'm thinking the later, like, obviously if they reference it as a joke in the first Superman film, it kind of means it was already established at that point. So I'm thinking Superman 4 and the Lois and Clark, they're all references to an existing idea that Superman changes in a phone booth that I think I had before.
Yes.
Superman 4 Quest for Peace, which I saw, obviously a bit older, not when I was an adult or anything. The whole thing's very, very interesting. Makes me question, like, the whole universe and everything.
Until next time, think better to act better.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes. Captain, I'm giving her all she's got. I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. Damn it, Jim. No, that's the other guy. I looked up the voice. It's not quite Scottish or Irish, and he doesn't go, Captain, I'm giving her all she's got, which is how I was going to do originally. Anyway, see if any of those are viable or you want some retakes.